At 11:47 a.m. on November 29, 1943, Staff Sergeant Eugene Moran crouched
inside the tail section of B-17F WWII as German flak tore through the
fuselage 20,000 feet above Bremen.
The 19-year-old tail gunner was flying his fifth mission with the 8th Air Force's 96th Bomb Group. 8 of his 9 crew members were already dead. The mission had begun 4 hours earlier at RAF Snetterton Heath in England.
346 B-17 Flying Fortresses lifted off that morning, bound for Bremen's industrial targets. Bremen's anti-aircraft
batteries had destroyed 64 bombers the previous month.
Moran's squadron had lost 11 tail gunners since September. The formation crossed the German coast at 23,000 feet. Moran scanned the sky
through his twin .50 caliber Browning machine guns. The tail position offered the widest view, but also meant being
isolated.
No one could reach him through the narrow crawl space.
If anything went wrong, he would face it alone. German fighters struck the formation first.
Messerschmitt Bf-109s attacked from above, firing 20mm cannons.
Moran tracked the fighter closing from 6 o'clock and squeezed his triggers. The guns hammered.
Spent brass casings clattered
around his boots.
The Messerschmitt rolled away, trailing smoke.
Then the flak began. Black bursts exploded across the formation. Each burst sent shrapnel fragments traveling at 3,000 feet per second. Moran felt the impact shake the aircraft. The intercom went silent.
Through his window, Moran watched WWII drift backward from the formation.
German fighters swarmed. More cannon rounds battered the fuselage. Moran returned fire, but the attackers came from every direction. A massive explosion rocked the aircraft. The nose section vanished in flames.
The bombardier, navigator, pilot, co-pilot, and flight engineer were gone. 3 more crewmen in the waist compartment died when another shell tore through the radio section.
Only Moran and the navigator remained alive. The navigator bailed out. Moran was alone. He grabbed his parachute. It was shredded. Bullet holes riddled the silk canopy.
The harness straps were torn.
It would not deploy. He had no way out. Then came the hit that changed everything. A direct flak strike severed the tail section.
The blast was deafening.
The entire tail assembly broke free from the fuselage. Moran felt the sudden jolt as gravity took over. He was falling, still.
Inside the tail section, 20,000 feet above Germany with no parachute.
The tail did not drop straight down.
The vertical and horizontal stabilizers acted as airfoils.
The section began to glide, spinning slowly. Moran clutched his gun handles. No manual covered what
to do when your aircraft splits in half. Through his window, he saw German fighters circling.
They assumed everyone
was dead, but Moran was alive and his guns still functioned.
He aimed at a fighter swooping past. He fired.
Tracers arced across the sky.
The German pilot banked away, startled that the severed tail section was shooting back. Moran kept firing. The tail section
continued its strange glide downward, spinning slowly, descending through the cold German sky. If you want to see how this tail gunner survived a 20,000-foot fall, please hit that like button.
It helps us.
Share more stories like this, and subscribe if you haven't.
Back to Moran. German anti-aircraft crews on the ground saw the tail section falling. They opened fire. He was being targeted by
fighters above and flak batteries below while falling inside a severed tail section. The altimeter still functioned.
19,000 feet, 18,000.
The ground rushed closer. Moran's head slammed against his
gun sight.
Blood ran into his eyes. His ribs slammed against the gun mounts, but he did not release the guns.
16,000. Foot 15,000. Trees below, fields. The town of Syke. 12 miles south of Bremen, 14,000 feet 13,000. He tried the escape hatch. It would not budge. The frame had warped. He was trapped inside a metal coffin falling at over 100 miles per hour. 12,000 feet 11,000. The spinning pressed him against the bulkhead. Gold fillings. And his teeth popped out from the pressure. 10,000 feet 9,000. The trees were close now. The tail section's glide was flattening slightly. The stabilizers were doing their work. 8,000 feet 7,000. Moran braced himself. No way to steer. No way to slow down. No way out. 6,000 feet 5,000. The forest below rushed up to meet him. 4,000 feet 3,000. The tail section plunged toward the forest outside. Psych! Moran could see individual pine trees now. There. Branches reached upward like dark fingers. The section was still spinning, still gliding at a steep angle, but gravity was winning. 2,000 feet 1,000. The impact came without warning. The tail section smashed into the tops of the pine trees. Branches snapped. Wood exploded. The metal framework groaned. The vertical stabilizer caught on a thick trunk and the entire section pivoted, slowing. More branches broke. The tail cartwheeled through the canopy, shedding pieces of aluminum skin. Then it hit the ground. The impact drove Moran's head into his gunsight. His skull cracked. Blood poured from his scalp. His ribs, already fractured from the spinning descent, broke completely. Both forearms snapped against the gun mounts. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. But he was alive. Moran tried to move. His arms would not respond. Broken. His chest screamed with every breath. Broken ribs. His head throbbed. Crushed. Skull. Blood filled his eyes. He could not see clearly. He heard voices. German voices. Footers crunching through the forest floor. Someone was coming. Two men appeared through the wreckage. They wore tattered clothing, not Wehrmacht uniforms, not Luftwaffe ground crew. These were prisoners, Serbian prisoners of war who had been working nearby when they saw the tail section fall. Both men were doctors captured by the Germans years earlier. They had been forced to work in labor camps. When they saw the American tail section crash into the trees, they ran toward it. They expected to find a body. Instead, they found Moran, barely conscious, drowning in his own blood. The Serbian doctors had no equipment, no medicines, no bandages, but they had training. They pulled Moran from the wreckage and laid him on the ground. One doctor held Moran's head still while the other checked his injuries. Crushed skull, broken forearms, broken ribs, internal bleeding likely. The doctors knew German patrols would arrive soon. They worked quickly. One of them used strips of cloth torn from his own shirt to bind Moran's arms. The other applied pressure to the head wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Within minutes, their mocked soldiers appeared. They surrounded the crash site with rifles raised. When they saw Moran, barely breathing, covered in blood, they lowered their weapons. This man was not a threat. He was barely alive. The German soldiers loaded Moran onto a stretcher. The Serbian doctors insisted on accompanying him. The Germans agreed. They transported Moran to a military hospital in Bremen, the same city he had bombed hours earlier. At the hospital, German doctors examined Moran.
They shook their heads. His injuries were catastrophic. The crushed skull alone should have killed him.
The broken
ribs had punctured his lungs. His forearms were shattered. He had lost massive amounts of blood.
By every medical standard, he should have been dead.
But the Serbian doctors refused to give up.
They stayed with Moran through
the night, monitoring his breathing, checking his pulse.
German medical staff, despite orders to prioritize
their own wounded, provided what supplies they could spare.
Moran drifted in and out of consciousness. When he was awake, the pain was unbearable.
When he was unconscious, he dreamed of falling. Always falling, the tail section spinning, the ground rushing up, the trees.
3 days passed, then 4.
Moran's condition stabilized. The crushed skull began to heal, though the pressure on his brain remained
dangerous.
His ribs started to mend. His forearms remained useless, but the bones were setting. On the 5th day, German intelligence officers arrived.
They wanted information. Bombing targets,
formation tactics, radio frequencies.
Moran gave them nothing. Rank, name, serial number. That was all. The interrogations continued for 2 weeks. The Germans tried everything. Threats, promises of better treatment, long periods of isolation. Moran said nothing. Finally, they gave up. On December 14, 1943, German guards loaded Moran onto a truck with other prisoners. The truck traveled east through Germany for 3 days. Moran sat in the back with 14 other American prisoners.
His arms were still in makeshift splints. His head wound had scabbed over, but infection was setting
in.
Every bump in the road sent pain through his broken ribs.
They arrived at Stalag Luft 3 on December 17. The camp held 10,000 Allied airmen in wooden
barracks surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers. Guards searched each prisoner at the gate.
They took Moran's
dog tags, his wedding ring, and the few personal items he still had. The barracks were freezing.
Each room held
32 men in wooden bunks. A single coal stove provided heat, but coal rations
were minimal. 2 blankets per prisoner.
Temperatures dropped to 10 degrees below zero.
That winter, food arrived twice daily. Morning ration was 1 slice of black
bread and Oz coffee made from burned barley.
Evening ration was thin soup, with occasional potato peelings.
The Red Cross sent food parcels, but German
guards confiscated most of them. Prisoners received 1 parcel per month instead of 1 per week.
Moran's arms began to heal incorrectly.
Without proper medical setting, the
bones fused at wrong angles. He could move his fingers, but his forearms remained twisted.
Simple tasks became impossible.
Buttoning a shirt, tying boots, holding a spoon.
Other prisoners helped him. The camp had a secret radio.
Prisoners assembled it from smuggled parts over 18
months.
They hid it inside a false wall in Barracks 14.
Each night, selected prisoners listened to BBC broadcasts and transcribed the news. The information spread through the camp by morning.
In January 1944, the radio reported Allied bombing raids intensifying over Germany. In February, they learned about the bombing of Monte Cassino.
In March, news came of increased air attacks on Berlin. Each report meant more American bombers overhead, more crews shot down, more prisoners arriving at Stalag Luft 3. On March 24, 1944, the camp erupted in chaos. 76 prisoners escaped through a tunnel called Harry. They had been digging for over a year, going 30 feet below ground to get under the wire. The
Tunnel stretched 336 feet from Barracks 104 to the forest beyond the fence.
The escape lasted one night. German guards discovered the tunnel at dawn.
They mobilized 70,000 troops, police, and
Hitler Youth to search for the escapees. Within 2 weeks, they recaptured 73 prisoners. The Gestapo executed 50 of them. They shot them individually in different locations on Hitler's direct orders. The remaining 23 prisoners returned to Stalag Luft 3. German guards posted their names on the bulletin board. The camp fell silent when prisoners read the list of the dead. Security tightened immediately. Guards
increased roll calls from twice daily to 5 times.
They banned all prisoner movement after dark. They searched every barracks weekly. They confiscated tools, wire, anything that could be used for digging. Moran watched it all from his bunk.
His arms were slowly regaining function, but he could not work
effectively. Other prisoners included him in their activities anyway. They shared food. They helped him dress. They told him stories about home. Months passed. Summer came. The war continued. The secret radio reported D-Day on June 6, Allied forces landing in Normandy. Prisoners celebrated quietly. Guards increased their vigilance. By autumn 1944, the Eastern Front was collapsing. Soviet forces pushed toward Germany. The secret radio confirmed it every night. Russian tanks were 300 m away, then 200. Then 100. On January 27, 1945, German guards ordered all prisoners to evacuate. The Soviets were 50 miles from the camp. The march began at 4 a.m. In a blizzard. 10,000 prisoners formed columns on the road outside Stalag Luft 3, each man carried one blanket and whatever food he could scavenge. Guards distributed no additional rations. The temperature was 15 degrees below zero. German guards told them they were marching west away from the Soviet advance. They did not say how far. They did not say where they were going. They said anyone who fell behind would be shot. The column moved out at dawn. Moran's arms still ached from the injuries 13 months earlier. His ribs had healed, but cold air made breathing painful. He wrapped his blanket around his shoulders and started walking. The first man died on the second day. An American bombardier from Ohio collapsed in the snow. Guards dragged his body to the roadside and kept the column moving. By the third day, 4 more prisoners had died. By the end of the first week, 23 bodies lay in the snow along the road. The prisoners walked 12 hours each day. Guards allowed 10-minute breaks every 2 hours. At night, they herded prisoners into barns or churches. Sometimes they slept in open fields. The snow continued falling. Temperatures dropped to 20 below zero. Food became the only thought. Guards provided no rations. Prisoners ate snow for water. Some found frozen potatoes in fields. Others pulled bark from trees. A few traded personal items to German civilians for bread. Most starved. Moran's feet blistered after the first week. The blisters burst and became infected. He could feel fluid squishing in his boots. With every step, other prisoners suffered worse. Frostbite blackened toes and fingers. Men lost parts of their feet but kept walking because stopping meant death. The march continued through February. The column covered 20 m some days, 10 milliseconds on bad days when blizzards reduced visibility to nothing. They made 5 miles. Guards pushed them forward regardless of conditions. By mid-February, the column had covered 200
They passed through abandoned German towns. Civilians watched from windows,
but offered no help.
The war was ending.
Everyone knew it. Germany was
collapsing, but the march continued.
Some prisoners tried to escape. Most failed. German guards shot 3 men who ran for the woods near Schremberg. They left the bodies where they fell as a warning.
The column kept moving.
Other prisoners simply gave up. They sat down in the snow and refused to walk. Guards shot them. 73 prisoners died during the first month of the march.
The survivors stopped
counting after that. Moran kept walking.
His infected feet screamed with every step. His arms ached constantly. His ribs throbbed in the cold. But he kept moving, one foot in front of the other, hour after hour, day
after day. The column crossed into central Germany.
Soviet artillery rumbled in the distance behind them.
American bombers flew overhead, heading east. The guards became nervous.
They knew the war was lost, but they followed their orders.
Keep the prisoners moving. Do not let them fall into enemy hands.
On March 15, 1945, after 47 days of walking, the column reached the town of
Bitterfeld.
Guards herded prisoners into an old factory building.
They said this was temporary. They said transportation would come soon. The prisoners collapsed on the factory floor. Most could not stand.
Moran's feet had swollen so badly his boots would not come off. 3 weeks passed in the factory at Bitterfeld.
Guards brought no food. Prisoners survived on scraps they found in the building. Rats became targets. Men caught them and roasted them over small fires. Others ate grass and weeds growing through cracks in the concrete floor.
Moran's weight dropped below 100 pounds. He had weighed 165 pounds when his B-17
was shot down 16 months earlier.
His ribs showed through his skin. His face was skeletal. His infected feet oozed constantly. Other prisoners were worse.
Dysentery spread through the factory.
Men too weak to stand soiled themselves
where they lay.
The stench was overwhelming.
German guards stayed outside. They
brought no medicine, no bandages, nothing.
On April 8, the prisoners heard artillery.
Close artillery.
American artillery.
The sound came from the west, growing louder each day.
Guards became agitated.
They held hurried conversations.
Some disappeared during the night. By April 10, small arms fire echoed through Bitterfeld. American infantry had entered the town.
German guards abandoned the factory.
They left the doors unlocked and simply walked away. Prisoners were too weak to celebrate. Most could not stand.
They lay on the factory floor listening to the battle outside.
Machine gun fire.
Tank cannons, the distinctive crack of M1 Garand rifles.
On April 11, 1945.
At 2 p.m., American soldiers from the 104th Infantry Division kicked open the
factory doors.
They stopped when they saw what was inside. Hundreds of skeletal men lying in their own filth.
The smell hit the soldiers immediately. Several backed outside to vomit. A medic entered first. He moved from prisoner to prisoner, checking pulses, assessing conditions. When he reached Moran, he shook his head.
The Wisconsin farm boy was still breathing but barely. His pulse was weak. His feet were gangrenous. His body was shutting down. The medics called for stretchers. They carried prisoners outside to waiting ambulances.
Moran drifted in and out of consciousness during the transport.
He remembered seeing American flags.
He Remembered hearing English. He remembered crying. The field hospital was 15 miles west.
Army doctors worked through the night treating freed prisoners.
They cut away Moran's boots.
His feet were black with necrosis.
The doctors considered amputation but decided to try saving them first.
They pumped Moran full of sulfa drugs and
penicillin.
They cleaned his wounds.
They gave him plasma.
They stabilized
his condition. On April 13, they transferred him to a larger hospital in France. Recovery took months.
The infection in his feet slowly cleared.
His weight climbed back to 120 pounds by June.
His arms regained most of their
function, though they remained slightly twisted from improper healing. On July 3, 1945, doctors cleared Moran for transport to the United States. He boarded a hospital ship at La Havre. The crossing took 8 days. On July 11, the ship docked in New York Harbor. Moran stood on deck as the Statue of Liberty came into view. He
had been gone for 2 years and 9 months. He had flown 5 combat missions.
He
had fallen 4 miles inside a severed tail section.
He had survived 17 months as a prisoner of war.
He had walked 600 m through a German winter.
He was 21 years old. The ship docked at Pier 90. Army personnel helped prisoners down the gang way. Crowds cheered from behind barriers. Someone played the national anthem over loudspeakers. Moran could not stop crying. He was home. From New York, Moran traveled by train to Camp Kilmer in New Jersey.
Army doctors conducted full medical examinations on all returning prisoners. They documented every injury, every scar, every lasting effect of captivity.
Moran's medical report filled 11 pages.
Crushed skull with healed fractures.
Both forearms improperly healed at 15 degrees angles.
6 ribs with old fracture.
Lines. Chronic pain in lower back from spinal compression during the fall.
Nerve damage in both feet from frostbite.
An infection. Malnutrition induced organ damage. Post-traumatic stress. The doctors recommended 3 months of additional treatment. Moran refused. He wanted to go home. He wanted to see his family.
He had not seen them since October 1942, nearly 3 years earlier.
On July 25, the Army granted him 30 days leave.
He took a bus to Wisconsin.
The ride took 2 days.
He slept most of the way, still recovering his strength.
His family met him at the bus station in Soldiers Grove.
His mother did not recognize him at first.
The skeletal man
climbing off the bus looked nothing like the son she remembered.
When she realized it was Eugene, she collapsed.
His father caught her.
Moran spent August at home, sleeping in his old bed,
eating his mother's cooking, walking the farm he had left 3 years earlier.
Neighbors visited daily. They asked questions. What was it like? Were the Germans cruel? Did he kill anyone? How did he survive the fall? Moran answered some questions, others he could not.
Some memories were too raw, the spinning
tail section, the screaming wind, the bodies of his crewmates, the death. March, the factory at Bitterfeld. On September 1, 1945, Moran returned to
active duty at Camp McCoy in Wisconsin.
The war with Japan had ended 2 weeks earlier.
The Army was demobilizing rapidly. Millions of soldiers were being
discharged. Moran's discharge papers arrived on December 1, final rank Staff Sergeant. Service dates October 1942 to December 1945. Combat missions 5. Status honorably discharged. His medals arrived separately. 2 Purple Hearts for wounds received in combat. The Air Medal with Gold Leaf Cluster for aerial achievement. The European Theatre Medal for service in the European campaign. The Good Conduct Medal, the Prisoner of War Medal. No medal existed for falling 4 miles inside a severed tail section while shooting at enemy fighters. Moran returned to Soldiers Grove as a civilian. He was 22 years old with no college education and no job prospects. The farm needed help, so he worked there planting, harvesting, tending livestock. The same work he had done before the war. But everything felt different. The weight of tools in his twisted arms, the pain in his feet after long days standing, the nightmares that woke him. Every night, the sound of aircraft engines that made him freeze. In 1947, he met a woman named Helen at a church social. They married 6 months later. Over the next decade, they had 9 children. Moran worked construction jobs to support his family. He never complained about his injuries. He never talked about the war unless directly asked. For decades, his story remained largely unknown. His crewmates were dead. The navigator who bailed out had moved to California and lost contact. The Serbian doctors who saved him had disappeared into post-war chaos. German records of the incident were scattered or destroyed. In 2007, a local newspaper in Wisconsin ran a short article about Moran. The headline read, "Local Veteran Survived Impossible Fall." The article caught the attention of John Armster, a military historian from Iowa. Armster had been researching ETH Air Force bomber losses over Germany. When he read about Moran's survival, he drove to Wisconsin to interview him. Moran was 83 years old. He still lived in Soldiers Grove. His wife Helen had died 3 years earlier. His 9 children visited regularly. His hands still bore the crooked angles from his broken forearms. 64 years earlier, Armbruster spent 3 days interviewing Moran. He recorded everything. The mission. Briefing on November 29, the fighter attacks, the flak, the moment the tail section separated, the fall, the Serbian doctors, Stalag Luft 3, the death march. All of it. Moran spoke slowly, carefully, remembering details he had not discussed in decades. He showed Armbruster his discharge papers, his medals, photographs from the war, a letter from the navigator who had bailed out sent in 1946 and never answered. Armster began researching the incident. He contacted the American Air Museum in Britain. They had records of Ricky Tikitavi, serial number 423-0359, assigned to the 339th Bomb Squadron. Missing and in action, November 29, 1943. Crew 10, killed in action 8, prisoners of war. 2. He found the missing aircrew report number 1392. It listed the crew names, the mission details, the location where the bomber was last seen. Near Brimman. 'Cause enemy aircraft. Armster traveled to Germany. He located the town of Syke, 12 miles south of Brimman. He interviewed elderly Germans who remembered November 1943. Several recalled seeing a tail section falling from the sky. One man, then 6 years old, had watched from a bomb shelter as it crashed into the forest. German researcher Wolf Kac had independently documented the crash. He had found the impact site in the woods. Pieces of aluminum skin still lay buried in the ground 70 years later. He had interviewed witnesses. He had mapped the debris field. Armbruster and Kac combined their research. In 2018, they organized a commemoration in Syke. They invited Moran's family. 6 of his 9 children made the trip to Germany. The town of Syke erected a memorial plaque at the crash site. It listed the names
of all 10 crew members.
The dedication ceremony took place on November 29,
2018, exactly 75 years after the crash. Moran's children stood in the forest where their father had landed. They saw the trees, the clearing, the spot where the tail section had finally stopped. German citizens who had witnessed the crash stood beside them. They shared
their memories. They expressed gratitude that Moran had survived.
The children met German researchers who had preserved the story. They met the grandson of one of the Serbian doctors who had saved Moran's life. They visited the hospital in Bremen where German doctors had treated him.
They stood on
the road where the death march had passed.
Moran was not there.
He had died 4 years
earlier on March 23, 2014.
He was 90 years old.
He had lived 69
years after falling 4 miles inside a severed B7 tail section. But his story survived.
In 2022, John Armster published his book about Moran. He titled it Tailspin.
The book documented everything:
the mission,
the fall, the survival, the captivity, the death march, the long life that
followed. The book included photographs Armster had collected. Moran as a young airman.
In 1943, the crew of Rikki Tikki Tavi standing beside their bomber.
The impact site in the German forest. The memorial plaque in Psych. Moran in his 80s sitting in his Wisconsin home holding his Purple Hearts. Armbruster interviewed aviation experts to understand how Moran
survived.
Aeronautical engineers analyzed the tail section structure.
The vertical stabilizer measured 13 foot tall.
The horizontal stabilizers spanned 43 foot. Together they created enough surface area to generate lift.
The tail's weight
distribution was critical.
The guns, ammunition, and Moran himself were positioned at the forward end.
This
created a natural balance point.
The stabilizers acted as wings. The section did not drop straight down.
It glided, spinning slowly, descending at roughly
70 miles per hour instead of terminal velocity. The trees provided the final element.
The pine forest outside Psych had trees over 80 foot tall.
The tail section hit branches at the top of the canopy. Each broken branch absorbed energy.
The vertical stabilizer caught on a thick trunk. The impact slowed the descent from 70 miles per hour to perhaps 30.
Still enough
to kill most people, but the combination of factors gave Moran a chance.
Only 2
other documented cases exist of airmen surviving similar falls.
British tail gunner Nicholas Alcomade fell 18,000 feet without a parachute in March 1944 and survived. American ball turret gunner
Alan McGee fell 22,000 feet and crashed through a train station roof in January
1943 and survived. All 3 men had certain factors in common. They remained with wreckage that created drag.
They hit objects that broke their fall.
Trees for Alcomade and Moran, a glass roof for McGee.
They were young and physically fit, and they were
extraordinarily lucky. Moran never considered himself lucky. He lost 8 crewmates on November 29, 1943. He
spent 17 months as a prisoner of war. He endured a 600-mile death march through a
German winter.
He carried physical and psychological scars for the rest of his life.
But he lived. He came home. He married.
He raised 9 children.
He worked. He built a life. He lived to the age of 90.
On October 18, 2008, the town of Soldiers Grove dedicated a street in his honor.
They named it Moran Way. Eugene attended the dedication with his family. He was 84 years old. He stood beside the new street sign, smiling, surrounded by his children and grandchildren. Someone asked him how it felt to have a street named after him. He said it felt unusual. He had only done what he needed to do: survive, come home, and live his life. That was Eugene Paul Moran, a farm boy from Wisconsin who fell 4 miles and refused to die. If this story touched you, please tap that like button. It truly helps us continue sharing these forgotten histories with more people who need to hear them. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. We're uncovering more remarkable survival stories from World War II that deserve to be remembered. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss them. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And does anyone in your family have a World War II story that's never been told? We'd love to hear it. Thank you for watching. And thank you, Eugene Moran, for showing us what the human spirit can endure. We will not forget.